2020 was never a good year for Jane Richardson. Losing both of her parents to Jeff the Killer, tackling a job at IHOP as a waitress with barely enough money to get by on, and being both mother and father to her little sister Jessie, who was 13 years old during the time. Jane's aunt Samantha Engel graciously helped out her niece as far as money was concerned, so it wasn't a total loss for Jane. After all, Samantha was Paula's sister, and after her death, Samantha felt it was right to take care of her sister's daughters. One day, while Jane was working her usual shift at IHOP, and on her break, she came across an ad in the newspaper sponsored by her local blood bank. In the ad, it said that the person would be paid $150 for their distribution, but they had to be a really healthy blood type in order to qualify. $150 just for giving blood. Was this too good to be true? Jane thought it would be good to take that money and to pay off her month's rent, so why not? After all, she did have clean blood. Without hesitation, Jane wrote the address of the local blood bank down, plus the phone number, finished off her orange juice, and went back to work. Another waitress, Alexis, who was covering for Jane, noticed her mood was more optimistic and appeared more pleasant as usual, refilling other customers' drinks. "Well, someone is really happy today," Alexis said. "Why wouldn't I be? I found an easy way to pay off a month's rent," Jane replied, pouring a fresh cup of coffee for a random man. "Thanks," the man said. "Oh yeah? What?" Alexis said. "The blood bank is offering $150 for anyone giving blood. You had to have a healthy blood type, is all it said." "Oh, I never heard of that, Jane. Usually they pay you only about $25, Alexis replied, refilling another customer's soda. "Somehow they must have made a few changes," Jane said, chuckling. "You gonna swing by?" Alexis said. "Yeah, after I leave here tonight." Jane and her friend walked around through the night until the atmosphere of this IHOP was calm, laid back, and less rushed. The lights of the shopping center where the restaurant was shined through the windows. Random cars on the highway passed by in the distance. Motorists who were looking for a bite to eat, getting off work, or going home set the mood for this particularly lazy California night. KTL News 5 was giving a report of the LAPD still pursuing Jeffrey Woods, aka Jeff the Killer, the one responsible for the murder of Jane's parents. The police commissioner said that they were having a hard time catching the suspect and had enlisted the aid of the FBI, CIA, and a Department of Justice in their manhunt. It would make Jane feel better to not only have Jeff captured, but wipe off the face of the earth entirely. One of the customers in IHOP that Jane noticed was a man in his late 40s, short brown hair, a goatee, sunglasses, and wearing a black three-piece suit, crisply pressed. He looked like Walter White with hair. Another distinguishing feature about this man was a Bluetooth earpiece hanging on his left earlobe. He browsed through the menu and surveyed the employees, paid close attention to Jane, almost as if she was some sort of famous person. "Hello, sir. What can I get you tonight?" Jane asked, smiling. "T-bone steak and eggs," the man said. "How do you want your steak?" "Well done. Eggs over easy." "Well done, over easy. Oh, I just wanted you to know that we have a new pomegranate pancake syrup. Something happened to make in my free time," Jane replied, taking the man's order. "Well, that sounds like a winner. You made the syrup?" the man asked. "Yes," Jane said cheerfully. "You have a lot of talent," the man replied. Jane went back to the kitchen to get the man's food prepared. While he was waiting, he fumbled with a button in his earpiece. "We found the perfect woman, sir," the man said, speaking at low volume. This man was actually an FBI agent. Agent Marcus East was still hunting down Jeff the Killer. Despite the LAPD's futile efforts and Agent East's determination, he was going to stop at nothing until Jeff was captured. "Excellent. Gather the other agents for next week. We know of a way to go after Jeffrey Woods." "Understood." Jane brought out East's meal and a fresh cup of coffee. "Thank you very much, ma'am," Agent East said pleasantly. "You're certainly welcome, sir," Jane replied. An hour later, Jane clocked out and left for the night. "I'll see you tomorrow, Alexis," Jane said. "See you, Janie," Alexis replied. After 30 minutes of being on the road, Jane came across the blood bank. She expected the building to be closed for the night, but oddly it was still open. This must have been one of the 24 hours. The outside of the building looked like total crap. but the interior was very pristine and sterile, similar to a doctor's office. Jane approached the receptionist at the desk and announced that she was there to get blood. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you?" the receptionist asked in a warm, friendly tone. "I came across your ad saying that you would pay anyone $150 for simply giving blood." "Oh, wonderful. What's your name, dear?" the reception asked. "Jane Richardson." "Okay, Miss Richardson. You go down the hall, second door on your right," the reception said. "Do I have to sign any papers or anything?" "No." "Oh, okay," Jane replied, laughing heartily. The receptionist laughed along with Jane. "We'll have your cash ready for you when you get done, honey," the receptionist said, smiling. Jane did indeed have healthy, clean blood. The O negative was her blood type, and after what seemed like hours, but only a few minutes, the doctor extracted Jane's blood, put a bandage over her spot, and wished her good night. Out front, the receptionist was going through files on her computer when she saw Jane. "Man, that needle hurt like hell," Jane said, chuckling. "Your arm is probably going to feel sore for a day or two," the receptionist said. "Well, tell me about it." "Well, here's your cash, Mrs. Richardson, $150. "Ah, this'll take care of my month's rent," Jane replied. "Behind on your rent, huh?" the receptionist asked. "A lot of stuff's been going on. Me with losing both my parents and all," Jane said. "Ah, I am so sorry." "Yeah, it's just me and my little sister. I have to be both mom and dad to her." "Well, my condolences go out to you and your sister, Jane," the receptionist said sympathetically. "Thanks. That does mean a lot." "You have a wonderful night, sweetie. Stay safe." "You too." The following morning, Jane was able to pay her month's rent and wouldn't have to worry about it until next month. While working the day shift at IHOP, Jane got a call from the blood bank she visited just the other night. What could it be? "Thank you for calling IHOP, now serving pomegranate pancake syrup on our new stuffed French toast. This is Jane Richardson. How can I help you?" "Miss Richardson, this is she. My name is Beth Williams, one of the doctors at the Biomedics Blood Bank. We were wondering if you could come by next week to give another sample of your blood." "Okay. We'll pay you around $10,000. Jane went silent for a few seconds. 10 grand for another sample of her blood? Was this for real? "Miss Richardson, are you still there?" Yeah, you said 10,000, right?" "Yes, ma'am." Okay, I'll see you next week then." "Thank you so much, Mrs. Richardson. We'll see you soon. Goodbye." Goodbye." 1 week later, it was the start of a beautiful day in the City of Angels. Jane returned to the Biomedics blood bank to distribute her blood and score an easy 10 grand. She wouldn't have to worry about money troubles for a long time. But why was Biomedics going to pay Jane $10,000? She couldn't quite figure it out herself. But if it meant to put that money into an account and make sure her and her sister were financially secure, then why not? Jane saw the same receptionist from last time. She still remembered her, and the doctor who drew her blood was there as well. When it was all over, Jane claimed her cash, stuffed it into her wallet, and was on her way. Just as she was about to get into her car, a couple of well-dressed women approached her, one of them flashing some sort of badge, and announced, "Jane Richardson?" "Yes." "Agent Tanya Margolis, CIA." "What's going on?" Jane asked, very puzzled. "Don't worry, you didn't do anything wrong, Miss Richardson. I was wondering if you could come with us." Where at exactly?" "You'll see. Just come with us," the second agent said. Without much hesitation, Jane got into the limo with the other agents. Where were they taking her? Why did they choose Jane? Was there any sort of significance? The two women were taking Jane to the CIA headquarters in Los Angeles, and they were going to explain everything to her as soon as they arrived. Around 90 minutes later, the limo arrived outside of the headquarters. Jane noticed there was also a U.S. Marshals and FBI van parked outside. What was this all about? Jane couldn't figure out what was going on. No matter how many times she asked the agents, it was always the same. Information was classified. But Jane wanted answers. She wanted to know what was going on. Once inside, Jane was greeted by a refreshing cold breeze that seemed to be coming from central air units. It was the hottest day ever. Jane was led to a room that looked like a police interrogation area. The inside was another male agent. Jane sat. "Welcome, Jane. We've been expecting you," the agent said. You mind telling me what's going on?" Jane asked. "Not at all. First off, I just want to say I'm sorry for the loss of your parents. I know how much you love them. I take it you heard that the LAPD has been having a difficult time pursuing your parents' assailant, Jeffrey Woods." You mean Jeff the killer? Exactly. We also got in touch with FBI, Department of Justice, Marshals. We were going to see to it that Jeff is stopped once for all. But what does this have to do with me? Well, after receiving word of your blood transfer to biomedics, it's apparent that you are the perfect blood type and maybe the key to stopping Jeffrey Woods. Let me get this straight, Jane said, trying to piece together what the agent said. After I gave my blood, you and these other agency guys want to use me to stop Jeff? Yes, ma'am. All you have to do is meet with our doctors. Meet with the doctors. Yes, ma'am. And then I'm free to go. All in due time, I promise you. Okay, Jane said hesitantly. After she was led into another room, one doctor did an eye scan of her ice blue eyes after giving her a vision test, reading an eye chart, and other such things. The scan of her eyes was stored in the computer. Next doctor to examine her was a cardiologist. Following a few brief questions such as date of birth, height, weight, that sort of thing, Jane had her blood pressure checked, which was 120/80. A normal blood pressure for a young lady. Very good, the cardiologist said. He checked her heartbeat and asked her to breathe when using his stethoscope. The cardiologist wrote down everything. Next, a general practitioner was to examine Jane, checking her eyes, ears, throats, reflexes, you name it. Jane passed with flying colors. Jane thought that was going to leave this building with no problem, be on her way, but then she was led down another hallway with 2 guards on either side. She noticed in one of the rooms stretchers lined up with blankets covering bodies. A total of 25 different people. All of them young women. All of them dead. What was going on here? She started to get a little prickled and freaked at the sight of the lifeless women who hadn't been disposed of, and anxiously asked where the guards were taking her. They didn't answer. So out of instinct, she began to assault the guards, incapacitating one of them. Her fighting skills she learned from Mary's father, Sheriff Nick. They really paid off, and in the midst of the brutal melee, Jane was tackled and sedated by one of the doctors. Her world began to blur and fade slowly. Slowly, Jane came back. She was strapped to a chair similar to what you'd see in a dentist's office. Around her, the room looked like an operating theater, bathed in a bright white light which gave the room a clean appearance. Jane couldn't see anybody because all that was in the room with her. Facing towards her was a 2-way mirror. She felt something on her forehead that was similar to a headband, but saw electrodes and wires running away from her. Her hands and feet were secured in place. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to break free. A few seconds later, she heard an unknown female voice on the intercom. It must have been that of an agent, researcher, maybe even one of the scientists. "Mrs. Richardson, can you hear me?" the voice asked, almost sympathetically. "Who is there?" "Well, it's me, Dr. Beth Williams from Biomedics. I didn't want to have you find out the hard way, but some of these agents, government officials, tell me you have a very healthy blood type. And for what I could gather, they were correct. If you're wondering, it was me who sedated you. I did not drag you into the room which you are in, dear, I can assure you. I will be standing by to monitor your vitals through this process," Dr. Williams said. "What are you talking about?" "Jane," Agent Magola said, "we brought you here because you're the perfect blood type and also the candidate for the following experiment that's been funded by the U.S. at this time, totaling in at about $6.9 million. We've received word from the LAPD that they had trouble in capturing the suspect responsible for the death of your parents, Bruce and Paula, and we, along with the FBI, Department of Justice, Marshals, and such, have agreed to help in the capture of Jeffrey Woods. If you haven't noticed, there's an intravenous needle in your arm. One of the scientists will be bringing in a serum to replace with your blood. The serum is classified, but it will ultimately help you in getting revenge on the one who took your parents' lives." Just then, a scientist came into the room, prepping Jane. They came in with a liquid hate. The container was 1.25 gallons with a biohazard symbol on it. The light from overhead cast it in the liquid, giving off a pretty glowing purple. The doctor who came in was to make sure everyone was ready and to monitor Jane's safety. He assured her she had nothing to be afraid of, and she was going to be okay afterwards. This made Jane feel a little better. A part of her was still scared to death, and the other half of her showed no fear and that she was ready. The doctor then put the intravenous tube into Jane's arm. The one tube ran into a container that would collect Jane's blood and ship to the American Red Cross for such patients who had the same type, and to receive a healthy blood transfusion. The other tube, though, was attached to a container holding the liquid hate. So in a way, this was like an embalming fluid prep setup, but with an experimental liquid. Despite being reassured by medical personnel that she had nothing to be scared of, a tear ran down her face. The process began. The voices that Jane heard, the scientists, the government officials, FBI, CIA, all of them, began to sound very distant. If something were to happen to her, she would see her deceased parents. On the other side of the two-way meter, doctors were monitoring Jane's vitals, her heart, brain waves, etc. Her heart was beating at a steady pace, showing the EKG beeping. The readings of the EEG, somehow normal brain activity. Jane saw her blood being drained slowly. This didn't bother her at first, but as it began to increase, she felt very weak, drowsy, and almost like she was being smothered by an unknown person with an ether-soaked rag. In the next few minutes, Jane's surroundings began to disappear, first into a state of unconsciousness and then weakness from loss of blood in her body. Then, death. The heart monitor of the room flatlined, the EEG went flat, and at that moment, Jane was clinically dead. Jane felt a gentle, familiar hand on her face, caressing her. It was her mother, Paula. She opened her eyes, and despite being deceased for over the few minutes, she was still in the room. Her father, Bruce, was there as well. "Mom, don't be afraid, Jane. Mommy's here," Paula cooed sweetly. She saw Jane's eyes welling up with tears and held her daughter in her arms, tightly comforting her. "Dad?" Bruce gave Jane a kiss on her head as she joined in to hold his child as well. Jane was weeping and she was glad to see her parents. "You're going to be okay, kiddo. You're going to be just fine," Bruce said softly, calming his daughter down. He was in his full military dress, his medals shining in the light of the room. Jane was in. His uniform was crisply pressed and his hair shiny and brushed back, almost as if he was going to attend some military ball. "What's going on?" Jane asked. "Well, since these doctors have emptied your body, you've gone out. But me and Daddy are going to stay here until you come back to life, honey," Paula said in her soft-spoken voice, her words soothing Jane's heart. "One thing I could never stand about IV needles is when someone can't find a vein to put it in. That happened to me when I was a little kid, and I suffered sepsis, and I felt like Swiss cheese. The old hag couldn't put the needle in right. You should have known that having experience as a doctor and a PhD doesn't come with vision," Bruce said, smiling and laughing. This made Jane smile and giggle as she laughed with her dad. She knew for the longest time that her dad was very silly and made her laugh without ever trying, and was still a goofball even in the afterlife. That's also what Paula loved about her husband. Jane's parents stayed with her until the liquid hate was fully administered in the body. "Your father couldn't stand needles being poked in him at all, honey, but getting like an allergy shot or vaccine didn't bother him. It was the intravenous needles that got in his nerves. Even when he was little, he fainted at the sight of a big needle." "Hey, that was a big needle," Bruce replied. "I know. I'm going to feel sore and stiff when I get up," Jane said. "Considering the chair you're in, I wouldn't be surprised, honey," Paula replied. "I think tonight you should take a nice hot bath with some Epsom salts," Bruce said. "Good idea," Jane replied. "You just remember one thing, my little Janey baby. If you ever need me or Daddy, we'll be right here," Jane said, pointing to Jane's heart. "And we'll come live in your dreams, sweetheart," Bruce added, smiling. "We are so proud of you. Jessie's lucky to have such a sweet sister, and we'll always be watching over you." "We love you, Jane," Bruce said. "Oh, the purple stuff is about finished," Paula said. "I love you, Mommy. I love you, Daddy," Jane said, giving her parents a hug before they slowly drifted back to heaven. "We love you too, Janey." Jane slowly regained consciousness and came to. The EKG and EEG roared back to life, showing heart and brain activity. Her vitals appearing normal as her vision adjusted. She saw she was still in the operating theater. When she looked down, she noticed her hands were now ivory white. She was pale, like a corpse. She screamed over the loss of her natural skin pigmentation and saw that her once bright platinum hair was now coal black. She tried to break free from the straits, thinking that she would fail, but somehow, with now increased strength, ripped both of the straits off and jerked the wires from her head. She tore the leg restraints away and got out of the chair. She looked towards the two-way mirror, now violent, angry. "What did you do to me?" She's probably going to experience a few violent episodes and a few tendencies for the first 90 seconds, one of the scientists said to the group. "You are now full of liquid hate, Mrs. Richardson." Sergeant Marlowe said. I look like white powder. That's because your natural skin color has gone away. Jane picked up a chair that was in the room and threw it against the two-way mirror, shattering the glass. She grabbed a hold of one of the doctors who were monitoring her vitals by the collar, slamming him against the wall with incredible strength, causing a huge dent. One of the scientists sounded an alarm for armed guards and medical personnel to restrain Jane. One pulled out a large syringe, trying to aim for Jane's neck, but Jane took the needle and stopped the doctor between the eyes and injected an air bubble into his brain. Two guards with automatic weapons tried to fire at Jane, but she grabbed both of their arms, causing them to fire at each other. One agent fired at Jane, but the bullet didn't seem to faze her. The wound automatically and quickly healed back up. She approached the agent, who was still firing multiple shots, and snapped his wrist, showing fractured bone and blood splurting everywhere. An orderly, standing at 650, 300 pounds, tackled Jane, attempting to subdue her, but Jane had the upper hand and flipped him over his side and snapped his neck. Just as carnage continued, Jane took the now empty liquid hate container and broke it against the round, took a sharp glass shard and stabbed to death several of the agents. Her clothes now stained with their blood. Amidst the dead, broken, mutilated bodies, and those who were out cold, Jane looked at the group who was in the room and now had no mirror, and said in a very ominous tone, "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for making me what I am. I know what I must do. I must kill Jeffrey Woods and end his reign of terror forever. If he is not killed, more lives will be lost. I am much, much stronger now. I am much, much stronger. I am unstoppable, unkillable. Their weapons are useless against me, and anyone who dares cross me will be the last thing they will ever see. I will kill Jeff the Killer, and no one can stop me." After another 90 seconds, Jane's homicidal tendencies slowly ceased, and she was on the ground. The same doctors who were examining her wanted to do x-rays, MRI scans, and the final examination, but Jane stood naked as the day she was born, as physicians didn't see any mini abnormal changes, no defects on her. She was even more beautiful, despite the fact that she was pale white with black eyes. "Okay, Mrs. Richardson, I want you to read what is on the chart right here," an eye doctor said. EFPTOZLPEDPED FCZPFELOPZD 1234567, printed by Century City Optometry, 1025 Santa Monica Boulevard, Suite 170, Los Angeles, California 90067. The eye doctor was flabbergasted that Jane read everything down to the fine print in the corner. He took a magnifying glass and saw that the address and company named at the bottom of the eye test chart were true. "Oh, so Doc, are there any other tests today, or can I walk out of here now and be on my way? Or are you going to give me another visual test, or just stand there and stare at me all day?" "I think I'll just stand and stare," the doctor said. "So I'll take that as you're free to go." Yeah." Jane took her blood-stained clothes that were in the hospital bag and walked out, still fully nude. On her way home, she saw clothes that were hanging out to dry on a clothesline. These clothes matched her new frame, and they were a pair of black sweatpants, sleeveless black under-armor shirt, and a black hoodie. They smelled sweet as she pulled them off the clothesline and got dressed in broad daylight. The only article of blood that wasn't blood-stained was her black Skechers sneakers. She slipped on her socks and shoes and called Jessie and told her she was okay. Jessie waited back at home for her sister to return. Mary was also waiting. Jess immediately ran into her big sister's arms, gasping emotionally and giving her a big hug. Mary hugged both Jessie and Jane and gave her honey bunny a kiss. "I'm so glad you're okay. I was worried," Mary said emotionally. "I knew you would come back," Jessie said through tears. "Of course I did," Jane replied, giving her little sister a hug. "Jeff now has some competition. So has many other criminals out there. Don't go to sleep. You won't wake up. For Jane the Killer is coming for you." This has been Jane the Killer, a creepypasta. Most of the information on it, as most creepypastas, is hard to come by. I think it was originally written by Fear Black Wolf or Mr. Angry Dog. Basically, just another one based off the creepypasta lore of Jeff the Killer. Have a happy Halloween.